70,000 years ago, the human race almost ceased to exist. Not from war, not from disease, from a decision made by a handful of people who had everything to lose. What made them cross? Made by people whose names we will never know. The only reason you are alive right now. In the next 14 minutes, you will follow the exact journey that made you possible. Around 74,000 years ago, something enormous happened on the other side of the world. The Toba supervolcano erupted, the largest known explosive eruption in 2.5 million years. It ejected an estimated 2,800 cubic kilometers of material into the atmosphere. Scientists have debated what it did to humanity. Early theories claimed it nearly wiped us out, a 6-year volcanic winter. Newer research, including sediment cores from Lake Malawi in East Africa, tells a more complex story. The catastrophic volcanic winter? Largely disputed. Human occupation continued at multiple African and Indian sites before and after the eruption. But here is what the science does confirm. Global temperatures dropped, somewhere between 1 and 5 degrees Celsius, and Africa was already under severe pressure. The ancient monsoon patterns had been shifting for thousands of years. Green corridors were dying. Savannas were turning to sand. For Koro's band, there were no more roots to dig. The game had gone. Other hominins, Neanderthals and Denisovans, held the remaining forests. Genetics confirms we interbred with both, which means we met them, which means they were real competition. The decision wasn't made in a grand council. It was made in the silence between a father and a mother. To stay was to watch the children starve. To move was to walk into the mouth of the unknown. They carried almost nothing: stone tools, the ember of a fire wrapped in bark, and their stories. They were not explorers, they were not conquerors. They were refugees. The first days were the hardest. Feet blistered. Hope was a finite resource, rationed more carefully than dried meat. They were learning the rhythm of survival in a dying land. And with each day they walked, the land that had almost killed them fell further behind. Weeks of walking brought them to the edge of the world, the Bab el-Mandeb, Arabic for the Gate of Grief, the strait separating the Horn of Africa from the Arabian Peninsula. Today the strait is 26 kilometers wide, but 70,000 years ago, sea levels were lower. Research published in quaternary science reviews shows that during low sea level periods, crossing may not have required sophisticated boats. Passive drifting on logs may have been sufficient. One important note: scientists debate the exact route. The northern Sinai Peninsula crossing is well documented in the archaeological record. The southern Bab el-Mandeb route is supported by genetics and stone tool evidence in Oman, dated to around 106,000 years ago. Both routes likely saw crossings at different times. But our story follows Koro and the Southern Gate. This is where the mythmakers earned their keep. A simple fact: we need to cross the water was not enough. The band needed a story, an ancestor who had walked this path before, a spirit who had turned the sea into a road. They needed faith to fight fear. Blombos Cave in South Africa gives us evidence of engraved ochre symbols dating to around 75,000 years ago. Symbolic thought was already alive in these people. They could tell stories, and stories could override fear. They crossed, not all at once, family by family, grip by grip. The water was treacherous. The current pulled against them. There was no going back. One heart-pounding, exhausting hour at a time. If they had turned back at that moment, the lineage of every person watching this video ends here in the water. They had survived the water. Now they had to survive the silence. They were not alone. Neanderthals had been in Eurasia for over 200,000 years. Denisovans too. These were not primitive brutes. They buried their dead, they used pigment, they made tools. And genetics confirms what happened next. We know because their DNA is still inside us. Every person of non-African descent carries roughly 1 to 4% Neanderthal DNA. The encounter was not only a confrontation, it was also contact. Fear is contagious. It can shatter a group faster than any predator. And this was the real test. Mara didn't call a vote. She didn't give a speech. She sang. Research in evolutionary musicology confirms that rhythmic and vocal synchrony activates the brain's reward system, releasing oxytocin and endorphins. Shared rhythm physically bonds a group. It synchronizes heartbeats. It merges individual fear into collective resolve. Mara didn't know the neuroscience, but she knew what worked. They did not have generals. They did not have weapons that could stop a Neanderthal. They had song, they had rhythm, they had the ability to sync their hearts into one collective beat. This was their superpower. If this story matters to you, subscribe. We are building the complete series. Episode 13 is coming. Moving the body across continents was hard, but something else was happening inside the mind. The stars became maps, the animals became ancestors, the wind became spirits. Every new landscape was given a name, a story, a meaning. They were not just moving bodies, they were moving an entire culture of imagination. Ochre use in symbolic behavior dates back to at least 165,000 years ago in Africa, according to researchers McBrearty and Stringer. The handprint wasn't decoration. It was a signature. It said, "I was here. I exist." Now you understand what you saw at the beginning of this video. That handprint, that moment. That is the first signature in human history. And beside it, his daughter made hers. One small hand next to one large hand. Both of them saying the same thing to the stone and to us 70,000 years later. We were here. The first GPS wasn't satellite. It was story. It was art. It was the human need to say, this place belongs to us. We have named it. We have painted it. It is ours now. They kept walking. For years. For generations. Along the lush coastline of India. Into the jungles of Southeast Asia. Genetic evidence places modern humans in Australia by at least 50,000 years ago. Every step was a story. Every death a lesson. Every birth a promise. And with each generation, the myths grew richer. They explained the stars, the animals, the spirits of the new lands. The story of the crossing grew larger. The monster in the strait grew more fearsome. The ancestor who led the way grew more powerful. This is how cultures are built. Not from facts, from stories that carry facts forward across time. And now you understand the second image you saw at the start of this video. That circle of people in the firelight. That is not a ritual. That is not a ceremony. That is an elder telling a child a story that happened before the child was born. This is the most important scene in human history. Not a battle. Not an invention. An elder, a child, a fire, a story. The story wasn't just history, it was identity. We are the people who cross the gate of grief. That is what the story said. We are the ones who survived. "70,000 years ago, a handful of people walked out of Africa. They carried almost nothing. But those stories became us. But they weren't the only ones in the dark. Next time, the encounter. Subscribe now to see the struggle for the soul of the Ice Age.